The first, under a new moon, a village councillor and his wife are torn to shreds in the street. A week later, the second, a soldier is hacked to pieces and his bloody pulp left hanging in a tree. And then the third, under the year's first full moon, a schoolteacher is ripped apart and his remains left to freeze in the ice. The prints left behind in the snow are massive. A village meeting is called and the leader, King Haakon, addresses his council.
"This massacre has to end," he begins. "We cannot afford a fourth."
"Then what are we going to do about it?"
a councillor asks.
"They've found prints in the snow," the king replies. "The prints of a bear of ungodly proportions."
"It can't be of this earth,"
a councillor screamed.
"It's an otherworldly demon sent here to prey on the good people of this town."
"Ridiculous!"
shouted the king.
"It is, I tell you. The public servants are being sacrificed. It's the downfall of the kingdom."
"Never!"
screamed the king as he brought his scepter down on the councilman's skull, shattering it and killing him instantly. The king sat quietly, as did the rest of the room, stunned into silence. Minutes passed, no one dared say a word. And then the king spoke.
"Lock down the village. No one is to leave their house, not until this beast is found, and I have its head on a spire."
There was a dull murmur. The fear of disagreement was thick in the air.
"Now!"
the king shouted as he lifted his scepter high above his head, prompting the councillors to scatter out of the room. The townspeople were distraught, and as a new week dawns, the directive is given by the town council that no one is to leave their house as the authorities attempt to hunt down the savage beast at large. 5 days pass, and personal provisions start to deplete. The people grow restless, hungry, and stir-crazy as they demand food for sustenance and fuel for warmth. The councillors relay messages to the townspeople that their resources are tied up hunting down the beast, and they will need to sit tight until the beast is brought down. The people are not impressed with the lack of progress. Unfortunately for all, the efforts to capture the monster are in vain. The traps set and the stakeouts sat fail miserably. It only allows the beast to stalk them down, and it tears them apart, where they lie in wait. Half the soldiers are wiped out in quick succession, the massive white bear screaming to the heavens as it drinks the blood of its victims. The unrest grows, and the people demand to be allowed to fight back. The king is forewarned of the population's distress, and to brace himself for an uprising if he doesn't cease the lockdown. A senior advisor warns the king he will soon have no subjects left unless the beast can be stopped. It will slowly wipe out his army and his council, while his people starve to death. And then, the suggestion is made. The townspeople are to band together and attack the beast en masse. The king likes the idea. At the very least, it will allow his remaining soldiers to attack from all sides and slaughter the beast. The townspeople gather and head to the edge of the village. There they stand, facing the forest, waiting. Snow begins to fall as the night becomes colder, and the villagers begin to grow restless. Cold and hungry, some decide to fall back where they are met with the waiting soldiers, who quickly command them to return to the front or be killed. Then, from out of nowhere, the massive blood-stained white bear appears and begins smashing the soldiers about, hitting them so hard that their internal organs explode on impact, and they die a horrible, agonizing death as they lay in a pile of flesh and shattered bone. Other soldiers leave their position and run to their aid, and soon meet the same fate. They've nearly been annihilated, and only 2 terrified soldiers remain. The beast towers over them, its hot breath belting down on them as its saliva, mixed with the blood of their comrades, hangs from its teeth in jars. They drop to their knees, quivering, shaking, petrified as their bladders release, and they stare directly into the eyes of death. Then, time seems to stop as a young girl walks between the two soldiers from behind and raises her hand to the enormous form. Its mood changes immediately, and it drops onto its front paws to face her. "Get away!" one of the soldiers manages to whisper as the little girl moves closer. She stares into its eyes, and it into hers, seemingly lost in a trance, until the child thrusts a spear into its neck, piercing its throat and pushing out around the base of its skull. It belts out an incredible roar as it leaps to its hind legs once more, which further ruptures its torn arteries, allowing copious amounts of blood to rain down on the little girl and the soldiers standing below. The soldiers can only stare with disbelief into the face of the carnage unfolding before them, as the beast screams and fills their vision with a canopy of red mist, and their ears with the ear-piercing cry of 1,000 lost souls. As its life drains away, it slowly falls to the ground with an impact so strong, it's felt all the way to the last person at the edge of the forest. And then silence. A moment of silence that seems so surreal after the screams of men, women, and children and an unnaturally large beast had filled the air a mere moment ago. The silence is short-lived and quickly replaced by the cheers of the townspeople as they realize that the beast was brought down by one of their own. This small girl, no older than 11. She stands on the back of the beast, pulls the spear from its neck and holds it aloft. The people revel in her victory, a victory for all. The soldiers regain their footing and confidence and then hack the massive bear's head off to take back to the king. They lead a procession of the entire town, themselves at the front with their trophy, and the girl held aloft by the townspeople, all chanting a song of victory for themselves and for the bravest one of all, one of their own. The soldiers enter the king's throne room with the entire town in tow. The king stares at the procession coming through the castle grounds, elated to see the beast's severed head in their possession. "We did it, sire!" one of the soldiers shouted with false pride. "It took out our entire battalion, and we are the only survivors. It took incredible strength and courage, but we did it for our king and country." "Liars!" the crowd shouted over them. "You were frozen with fear! The real hero is here!" And then the king shouted for silence. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but somehow knew it was true. He stared down at his two questionably loyal subjects, kneeling before him with the bloody head of the bear between them.
What is the truth? And do not dare lie to your king."
Shaking with sweat and the bear's blood running off his face, one of the soldiers looked up to confirm that it wasn't them that killed the beast. It was indeed the little girl. The king, without hesitation, brought his scepter down onto both of them with the force of pure rage, crushing their skulls and killing them both.
"Cowards!" he belted. "You're both worthless to me."
He looked towards the crowd.
"Especially if you get outshone by a child. Come forward,"
the king demanded, and the little girl stepped down from being held aloft and then made her way up the stairs to face the king.
"How is it that one as small and as young as you has such courage to be able to slay a wild bear?"
"My father died when I was 7,
she began.
That left my shattered mother and I alone, to fend for ourselves. She always fed me first, and never had enough for herself. So slowly, she starved to death. Then it was up to me. I learned to live off the land. I learned to hunt. One night, I found an orphaned bear. It was attempting to suckle its dead mother who had succumbed to a failed hunting attempt. I butchered the mother, fed myself, and the cub. For years we lived together in the wilderness, He grew at an incredible rate to protect me, and he obeyed my every command.
The king was slowly piecing together her story.
This is outrageous, he declared. Are you trying to tell me that you trained the beast to attack our village?
Her gaze narrowed and she looked him straight in the eye.
Only those connected to you.
Why?
He asked. My father's harvest failed, and he couldn't pay his taxes. You had him killed. From that day on, I vowed that I would stand before you and murder you myself.
The king couldn't help himself. He bellowed out a huge cry of laughter.
Little girl, it is the law. Those who cannot contribute get condemned. I truly admire your commitment and courage. You have a fire burning within you and a thirst for revenge. However, only one of us will die tonight.
And with that, he raised his scepter, only to be met with a rapid barrage of spears from the people he stood before, each and every one of them finding its mark in his fatty flesh. The king, now urchin-like, stumbled back into his throne, wheezing, the air leaking from his punctured lungs. The little girl stepped slowly towards him and took a knife from her belt. She leaned in and whispered in his ear, "Now what are you going to do?" He gasped for air as the blood in his lungs pooled, not able to form any words at all.
That's what I thought.
The girl spat at him.
Those that can't contribute get condemned.
She drove the knife into his side, making his body jerk up, causing him to fall forward down the steps and onto the array of spears, pushing them all the way through him as his body slid down the length of them, coming to rest on the palace floor. His reign was over. Exhausted, the little girl sat down as a group of villagers approached her and placed the late king's crown on her head. The crowd cheered, and the little girl stared 1,000 yards ahead, not realizing that this would be her fate. A huge thanks to all who support us through Patreon, and an extra special thanks to The Dark Cosmos, 5 Plate Destiny, Christina, Patrick Like, and Richard Turley.